Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of our Thrive in China Roundtable. In today's episode, we are going to be talking about professional employment organizations and how you can benefit using them, especially if you're launching your business, but also if you already have subsidiaries in China. Now, as we normally do on our roundtables, especially for those that are newcomers to our community, I would love to understand your background. So again, we are going to be sending out emails. They're going to be sent out from Joe, my colleague, in regards to what stage are you in. It would be wonderful if you could respond to us. It just gives us insight into the community as a whole. So if you are a newbie, if you are a startup, or if you're an experienced China hand, do let us know. For those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Christina Kohler-Coluccia. I'm the head of business advisory at Woodburn Accountants and Advisors. I'm a leading expert on inbound investment into China, having helped over 750 international companies with their market entry, their implementation of their business models, as well as their growth and their scaling in China. We offer a variety of different services, all the way from advisory as part of our non-executive director services, all the way through to actual incorporation, trademark, accounting, tax, payroll services. Our added value is really that we can advise you on your current obstacles or pain points that are along your journey and how to then avoid them, fix them, bypass them, to achieve success, and most importantly, to achieve profitability. So as a gift to all members of our community, we're offering a free copy of our ebook. If you haven't received your free copy, then just email me at christina@woodburnglobal.com. It's the book on the 10 biggest mistakes companies make in China. So we have hit Roundtable 29 in this year's 2023 Thrive in China Roundtable sessions. The topic, as I mentioned, is on the benefits of using a professional employer organization for your China launch. I will be touching on the intricacies of social insurance and housing fund and how that could play a role of using PEOs as well. Now, just from a definition standpoint, a professional employer organization, another word for that will also be an employer of record. It means an entity, a company in the jurisdiction that you're located in that is going to hire people on your behalf. So they are the employer of record, meaning that the employment contracts are with them. All right. So I want to start off today just giving a little bit of background on Chinese employment law, what it entails, what you can and what you cannot do when you're hiring people. So what I have found in terms of people's journey into China is that they will use an ecosystem of partners, distributors, TPs, and whatnot. But at some point in their startup phase, they are going to find that they probably need to bring certain things in-house, and that in-house activity needs to be done on the ground in China. So they start looking at around and employing people. And obviously, they're not ready to commit to setting up an entity or structure in China. And so they make the assumption that from their home jurisdiction, they can just sign employment contracts with people in China. That is not the case, which is why I want to highlight what the Chinese employment law states. Okay. So question number one is, can you hire in China without a legal presence? No. Companies must have a local, legal, corporate presence within the territory of China to hire employees, okay? Especially, and obviously I'm making the assumption, so I want to highlight this, if those employees are residing in mainland China. If you are hiring mainland Chinese employees, if you are hiring foreign employees that are residing full-time in China, those individuals need to be engaged and hired by a local entity in China. Okay. So the best practice is obviously to set up your own structure. If you're not ready to commit to the market or you're worried about the risks in the market, then the next best thing is using a professional employment organization whose role is to then hire these people legally in China because they have their own entity. All right. Again, if you have any questions on this, just put it in the chat box, guys. The next is a written employment contract required? And again, a lot of this might seem like common sense, but when I am talking to a lot of companies where they did not know the rules, the regulations about the labor law in China, is that they had an entity overseas and they would have a verbal commitment, or I like to call it an email commitment, about the jobs and responsibilities that individual would do, and no formal employment contract. According to Chinese labor law, a written employment contract is required in China. If you want to take that individual to court, a contract is a must, okay? Now, in China, people residing in China, those individuals must be engaged by a local company in China, and as a consequence, a written employment contract is also then required. If you fail to sign a written contract with an employee, you have to understand that there is compensation that is owed, or a penalty compensation is owed to that individual, because in the eyes of the Labor Bureau, they see it as the company's fault for having not signed the contract. So if you don't sign a contract with your employee, don't give them a written contract, then for every month that they have worked for you, it will be double pay until a written contract is actually signed, okay? Now, you can also say, well, what happens if I sign the contract, but the employee hasn't signed the contract? Well, in that case, you have written proof that you have signed the contract, that the employee has never sent it back, unless they can show proof that they have, but then you need to show the email communication that you've received it. Otherwise, then there's no penalty. There's no penalty for the employee, but there's also no penalty for you, okay? So you've always got to make sure that the employment contract is at a minimum always signed by the company. Now, fixed-term employment contracts are permissible in China, but there are certain rules that you have to abide by, okay? You can sign 2 fixed-term contracts. I give you an example. Your first contract is for 2 years. Your next contract is for 3 years. After those 5 years, it is a requirement that that employee now signs an open-ended contract, okay? You can also sign from day one an open-ended contract with no termination date, but you have obviously termination clauses within that contract. I will say this out of personal experience. I find for ease of administration, it is much easier to sign an open-ended contract, because the tendency is that everybody forgets about renewing contracts, and it doesn't get done unless you have a very, very strict calendar that highlights when you have to do these actions. And so by having an open-ended contract, that contract is there for life unless you have make changes to the terms and conditions. But ultimately, you don't have to sign ever a new contract. Remember, if you forget to sign a new contract after the first term of employment and you don't do it, it's double pay for every month that they haven't received a renewal contract, okay? So, you know, I'm always about creating efficiency within your organization, and we are all human. And I personally have done it twice in my career where I have forgotten to renew terms. And quite frankly, I was absolutely liable to pay for double pay, and I did. And you have to also imagine that this affects your budget. Okay, it's like having 2 people, 2 salaries for 1 person, and it just affects your budget, right? So think very carefully about it from an administrative point of view. Now, the next question that people also ask is, are there alternatives besides direct employment? So that's the whole point of today's presentation, is to say that there are a number of ways that you can hire people in China, okay? Now, obviously, if you have your own subsidiary, then you can hire people directly and you're in control of that employment relationship. There are labor dispatch agencies in China where they will hire people, and usually these terms and conditions are for temporary individuals, subsidiary roles, auxiliary roles. I'll give you an example: temporary employment if you have peak seasons, or for example, if you have a maternity case and one of your female employees is on maternity leave and you need to have somebody subsidize that role, it's only every 3-4 months. You can do those types of employments through a labor dispatch agency where they are dispatching employees to your organization to help with these seasonal peaks or with these subsidiary roles. Keep in mind, these are temporary obligations, not permanent obligations. And then you also have part-time employment, which is another option that sometimes people aren't aware about, okay? So part-time employees work no more than 4 hours per day and 24 hours per week, okay? They are entitled to certain minimum requirements. They must have an employment contract. There is overtime pay. They have vacation, but no social insurance and housing fund is owed to them, okay? That's the disadvantage for the employees in terms of the part-time employment. But keep in mind that they are still employed by an entity that is registered in China. Labor dispatch agencies are generally Chinese-owned companies, generally payroll agencies that have labor dispatch within their business scope and have the ability to dispatch employees to you. Independent contractors. Now, this is becoming an extremely hot topic in China. Why? Because when you are looking at the cross-border e-commerce business model, you will have a lot of individual KOLs, individual influencers. You might have some freelance marketing people that are promoting your brand or acting as brand ambassadors, right? Now, in an ideal scenario, these KOLs, influencers, I know I hate to use the word part-time because part-time is previous, or people that are contracting with you, ideally they will have their own entities in China where you would then have a service agreement with them, and it's a consulting fee or a service fee that is then paid, and it's between company and company. That's in an ideal world. In a non-ideal world, you can imagine that there are millions of KOLs and influencers out there who have not set up their own companies and are actually looking to earn income acting as an influencer, KOL, marketing expert, or whatever you like, without having this entity or structure. What we have found is that we've treated a lot of these individuals as interns, and that's what we call those types of contracts. And in this regard, there is a formal contract as an internship, and they are very similar to part-time employment. They have a employment agreement. It's not even a freelance agreement. It's an independent contracting relationship, internship relationship, where they are paid a salary, but again, no social insurance and housing fund is covered. Why I prefer these types of relationships, or why we have control over these relationships by having this internship agreement, is because we are making sure that these individuals are paying income tax on the service fee that is paid to them, okay? If you have the independent contracting relationship, or you're just, you have to always imagine with your own entity and structure in China, how are you going to do the bookkeeping? Do you have the supporting documents to prove the transaction? And if you don't have that supporting document, then you're going to run into issues with your auditors. So you have to think very carefully on how you are contracting with them, how the agreements are put in place, how salaries are paid, how overtime or vacation is paid, whether social insurance and housing fund is paid, etc. And obviously, the next one is freelancing. Freelancing is an extremely hot topic. Now, why I'm putting this on a separate slide is because freelancing, there is no law in China that governs the concept of freelancing, which is why I was highlighting the internship explanation previously, okay? Freelancing, it's not forbidden in China, but what we need to understand is that if an overseas company pays somebody for a freelancing job, that individual in China needs to declare that income, pay income tax, and then also pay social insurance and housing fund as long as that amount is higher than minimum wage. And it's up to the individual freelancer to pay for it, okay? So when you are doing freelancing arrangements, and this is really from abroad to China, Please make sure you have contracts in place to verify the terms and conditions of this relationship, and highlight in that contract that all tax, legal, insurance issues are on behalf of the freelancer and there's no liability put on the company. Okay. Now, what is a professional employer organization? I find all of these options, labor dispatch, part-time employees, internship relationships, freelancing agreements, wishy-washy. Okay. You could get in trouble. And obviously, my role in advising people in China is that we eliminate as much of the risk as possible. In order to eliminate that risk and to minimize your commitment to the market, you can use a professional employer organization. Now, how does that actually work? So you've got the employer of record, this employment organization at the top. They've got a service agreement with the client, with the company overseas that is looking to hire individuals in China. That client has found employees that they want to hire, or they have used a recruitment company to find employees that they want to hire. And they are the operating employer, meaning that the operations of the business are going to be dealt between the client and the employee. Between the employer of record and the employee, there is an administration aspect, which means that they are the official employer of record and all employment documents are associated with them. This is actually ultimately the co-employment relationship between three parties: employer of record, the company abroad, and the employee. Okay. Now, like this, in this scenario, you are 100% sure that the employee is hired by a company full-time. You also have highlighted the jobs, and responsibilities that this employee will have. You know that the salary will be broken down into social insurance aspects, housing fund aspects, income tax aspects, and everything will be declared properly. And you know that the employee is also contributing to that, and you have an awareness of it. Now, obviously, if there are any HR issues associated with that employee, or if that employee has any HR questions, their job is to go to the employer of record to get that information settled and to have that clarity. I always think it's important to also have the company abroad be part of those discussions so that there is full transparency and clarity amongst the three parties. But that is ultimately what a professional employment organization or an employer of record company does, is that they act as an employer of record, hiring people on the behalf of companies that have not set up entities in China. Okay. Now, why would you use such an organization? Well, first and foremost, I hope everybody has it in their head that the reason you would use such an organization is for transparency and clarity, and knowing that the employee that you're looking to hire is fully legally engaged with an entity in China. Okay. I guess the other question you have to ask is, why would you not set up your own entity? And I think the issue is ultimately that probably the company needs to hire on the ground staff to handle with operations before committing to actually setting up an entity. They might have set certain KPI targets, and if they haven't reached those, then that doesn't trigger them setting up a structure. Could also be that you need these employees to test the market, to do research, to do certain marketing activities, exploration activities, building up an ecosystem and a network of people, right? You might also have it that it's project-based. So you ultimately need this employee only for a certain period of time, let's say 6 months, 1 year, a year and a half, and they need to be based in China. And so they're acting as ultimately like a contractor for a certain period of time. And then obviously, if you are ready to set up an entity, everybody knows that it does take around 3 to 6 months to set up. But if you find this jewel of an individual that you don't want to lose because your entity is not yet set up, then for that 3 to 6 months, you could use such an organization to help you hire them. Okay. So this is why you would use them. But I do want to highlight the disadvantages. Okay. And I know these disadvantages are soft sells, but it can make it very difficult to find that right fit for your organization. So the first disadvantage is that really what we have found doing that is that employees don't necessarily have a sense of belonging. So if you look at this, and I don't know if you guys can see my arrow, but basically the employee is reporting to the company, but there's no legality to that because the employee is hired with the employer of record, where they're also not part of that team because they're not operating with that team. So it can be really difficult for the employee to have an understanding of belonging. Where do they belong? As well as an understanding of, is the company serious about the market? Are they committed to the market? Why should I actually work for them if this is only going to be an exploration or testing phase? If the results show that there is no market for them, then, I'm out of a job. So it doesn't give them any sense of commitment either, right? And we have found that a lot of employees are unwilling to sign in these types of relationships because of this type of instability that they feel. Okay. In addition to that, the company, the employer of record, will have their standard employment contracts, employee handbooks, and they're going to abide by their own rules and regulations. So it might also be very difficult for you as a company to tweak those employment contracts, tweak those employee handbooks, and make it unique to your relationship with the employee. Sometimes you do have to abide by the standard templates, okay? And you have to keep in mind that employment contracts need to be valid for at least 1 year. And what I mean by that is that you can have an open-ended agreement, which again offers the greatest flexibility, or you sign a fixed term agreement, like I mentioned earlier, but that has to be a minimum of 1 year. Can't sign a 6-month agreement. Okay, so if you are looking for a contractor for a certain period of time, that contract has to be at least for 1 year, and you need to keep in mind of that. Obviously, you should all be reviewing exit clauses, termination clauses within these employment contracts, so you know what can trigger a breach of contract or a way for you to terminate the relationships with those employees. Now, I want people to realize that when I say professional employment organization, I have used that term because there are service providers that only do this. This is their job. This is what they do. And this is their expertise. However, I also want you to realize that the tendency is for a lot of companies to use their ecosystem to hire their employees. So I have had clients who have used their distributors, who have used suppliers, who have used logistics providers to act as the employers of record to hire these employees. Doesn't mean it's perfect by any means, but I do want people to realize that if a company has an entity in China, they can always hire anybody. And as a result of that, you can use anybody to hire those people. Okay. Doesn't have to be a professional employment organization. My recommendation is preferred because, again, they are the experts in the market in how to do this. One thing that I want to highlight is the issue around social insurance and housing fund. So let me give you a bit of context. In China, social insurance and housing fund is owed to all employees by law, to foreigners, as well as local Chinese employees. Keeping in mind that there will be slight differences by city, and you have to understand what those differences will be. Some cities in China don't require that foreigners pay into the social insurance and housing fund schemes. Social insurance and housing fund is calculated based on the rates applicable in the cities where those entities are registered. I'm going to give you an example of Woodburn. Our entity is registered in Shanghai. My employees that I hire are based in Shanghai. They have hukou status in Shanghai. Hukou is the residency status in Shanghai. We contribute to the Shanghai Social Insurance and Housing Fund scheme. If Woodburn tomorrow would decide that they want to hire somebody in Ningbo, I either have to set up a branch office in Ningbo, or I have to tell that employee that they're going to be contributing to the Shanghai social insurance and housing fund scheme, and they may not like that because they're residing in Ningbo. Or alternatively, I can go to a professional employment organization that has a branch in Ningbo and engage with them to act as a third party to hire the individual, meaning the employment contract is between the third party agency in Ningbo and the employee in Ningbo. And I have a service engagement with them where I pay them the salary, the service fee to do that service. Okay. Why would I do that? Because opening and maintaining a branch office is more costly than actually engaging somebody in Ningbo to do that employment relationship. But again, I'm not keen on doing it because ultimately this Ningbo employee, might find the relationship unstable, right? In an ideal scenario, they would just pop onto the Shanghai Social Insurance and Housing Fund scheme. But I totally understand it. If this Ningbo employee has purchased a property in Ningbo, they will want that housing fund contribution to go to Ningbo so that they can pay off their mortgages. So I completely understand them in this regard. Now, it is a bit of an issue in China regarding the social insurance and housing fund schemes. People should not take it lightly. It is really part of the interview understanding, and you have to take all of this into mind. So this is why I say professional employment organizations can be multi-beneficial, not only when you launch your business, but also if you're looking to expand into other cities within China without setting up branch offices. Okay. A couple of case studies that I wanted to highlight, and I quite frankly, this is the end of the presentation. It's a really short understanding here today. I just really wanted for people to understand what professional employment agencies do, what their benefits are, what are the downsides to these employment relationships, but also how it helps you to expand within China. But just to close off today's presentation, let me touch on a couple of case studies. So the first case study I want to highlight was a Spanish company that engaged with us to hire an individual who also actually sat in our offices. Was a sales individual going out and selling the products from the Spanish company, industrial products. This person was employed by us for a period of 2 years until it was discovered that ultimately it didn't make sense having this individual on the ground. In fact, these deals could have been brokered directly from Spain with just a few short business trips coming over to China. So they actually relocated this individual to Spain, got him a visa to stay in Spain, and terminated the services. So when you are using this type of scheme, this type of business model, it's really important to evaluate over time whether this scheme makes sense. And if it doesn't, and it costs you more than actually relocating the individual and just paying for business trips back and forth, then you've got to take that into consideration. Remember, we're all about cost saving, right? Another case study that I want to highlight is another company out of Germany that has also engaged with us to use this employer record scheme. Now, their story is interesting. They are a small subsidiary in Germany. They are a small subsidiary of a very large group of companies. For them to get the approval to set up a subsidiary in China, it's already been about 1.5 years that they are in discussions and going back and forth with the group's board of directors. In the meantime, they need business to continue. So they are already at a stage where they have 5 employees in China who are employed by Woodburn and there's no entity. All right. Now, in this scenario, the employees, it was very hard to recruit certain employees because of, one, the fact that some talented individuals were not based in Shanghai and didn't want the social insurance and housing fund scheme of Shanghai. 2, they did want to centralize all the people in one location because in case they are about to set up an entity in China. But what's interesting is that the individuals that are employed in China indirectly by this German company have been pushing them on the setup of a structure because they just want security in knowing which direction the company is going into. They see the growth by the number of employees that is increasing and the headcount that is increasing. but it's just, again, weird for them that there's no entity at this point where there are 5 employees, right? So there's a constant back and forth discussion. Sometimes it's weird, you know, how do you answer it? How do you say it's the board of directors that are not allowing us to set up an entity? It just worries them then what's the future that they have within the company and within the organization. Then we have a company based out of Qingdao, a manufacturing company, who actually has a group of salespeople located throughout China. And it has come to their attention that several of these individuals that are directly employed by the Qingdao company are fussing now about their social insurance and housing scheme funds, and that they want them to be localized in the city where they are living. This has now pushed the company to evaluate whether they're going to set up satellite branch offices to put people in, or whether they're going to use a professional employment organization to hire those individuals in those locations so that they can localize their social insurance and housing fund. As you can imagine, this takes a lot of planning, a lot of explaining to the employees about how these relationships work, and ultimately what is the goal is to retain them as much as possible, especially if they are ones that are doing a great job. So it's not something that you can develop overnight, especially when you already have an existing team on the ground. It's something that could take a few months to develop, to also understand what the cost benefits are for the company that's already in Qingdao. And they haven't taken action on it yet because they're still in a deciding factor on how to do the employment. The goal is for January 1st, 2024, to have a solid projection for these employees to fulfill their wishes and to give them an understanding of where they are going. But as you can see, there are a lot of scenarios that can arise when using the service. There are a lot of benefits there, but as with everything, there are also disadvantages that you have to just weigh into the calculation, right? When you are using this methodology in regards to employer of record schemes, listen to your employees, take care of your employees. Just because you're using an intermediary to do the hiring doesn't mean you should forget about them. You should be part of the salary review discussions. You should be part of the end of probation period discussions. You should be talking about performance of the individuals. Remember, the employers of record are not looking at performance. They're just looking at the deadlines and the salary payments and the social insurance and housing funds. The performance of the individual has to really come from the companies. So remember that we want to treat our employees fairly. Our goal is to retain the ones that fit best within our structure for the future growth and scaling of what we want to do in China. And make sure you have that clarity and transparency over those employment relationships. Like I said, today is really short and sweet. I think it's only been a half an hour of presentation. And I love that I can mix it up, that some are short and some are longer. If you do have any questions regarding today's presentation, add them into the chat box. Nothing has popped in yet. Love to hear what your biggest takeaways were from today. It always helps me to steer the conversations. In today's email with the recording, we'll provide you a link to organize a phone call with us if you would like to have a free 30-minute call to see how we could possibly help you. And obviously, let's bring the conversation back into our Thrive in China community on WeChat. Connect with me, type in Thrive in China, and I will connect you into our community of over 300 people now. It's fantastic. Where we highlight upcoming events all around China topics, but also if questions arise about who you need to contact and reach out to, then you can do that. And last but not least, next Wednesday, we do not have a roundtable. It's a public holiday in Europe, and I'm full-time mommy on that day. But our next roundtable will be on the 8th of November, where we will be talking about how to vet potential business partners in China. I'm a big believer in building an ecosystem and a network in China, and I want to talk in that presentation about how to vet all types of individuals, all types of companies to protect yourself and to minimize your risk in China. So stay tuned for that. We've only got 6 more roundtables left in 2023, so it's really exciting to finish up this year's roundtable topics. I would like to wish everybody a fantastic day. Take care, and goodbye.